It's kind of considered the first film that accurately portrays what the GDR was actually like. Welcome back to Mind Matters, everyone. We've had some new listeners and viewers recently, so we figured we'd do something which we rarely did, or which I think we used to do, but then fell out of the habit, and that's actually introducing ourselves. We refer to each other sporadically during our conversations, but I am Harrison.
I'm Elon.
And I'm Adam.
And with that out of the way, today we are going to be discussing a movie, but not just a movie. The movie will be kind of a launching pad for a wider discussion. Last night we watched The Lives of Others, a German movie by, what's his name? Florian Henckel von Donnersmarck. It was his first movie. He wrote and directed it. And it is about a playwright, an East German playwright. It takes place in 1984 into 1985. And then briefly at the end of the movie, the years after the fall of the wall and the few years after that event. And we'll give a basic overview of what happens in the movie so that those of you who haven't seen it have some idea. There will be frequent spoilers because the movie's like 15 years old or something like that. So you've had time to watch it, and the movie's good whether or not it's spoiled for you. I recommend it. I saw it years ago, probably soon after it came out, and this was the first time rewatching it since then, and I think it's a great movie. We'll have some things to say about its positives and negatives, though, even though I don't think the movie itself has very many negatives, if any. But first, maybe we'll give a brief overview. So the movie is about, I'm going to get my notes here for the names. I mentioned the playwright, Georg Draiman. So he plays a playwright who's in the good books with the GDR government. So he doesn't write subversive plays, doesn't have, he's friends with ministers, friends with people in high places, has won awards and things like that. He writes uplifting plays, showing the socialist, humanistic spirit of the working class, I guess you could put it that way. And he's in a relationship with his lead actress, Krista Maria Seeland. I'll just get this out of the way. This isn't based on real events. Before I get into some more of the plot, I'll just give a very brief rundown. Florian, the director, Von Donnersmarck, he researched for about a year and a half before writing the film, so he read in the archives of the Stasi. He talked to ex-Stasi men, officers, and victims of the Stasi. After a year and a half, he started writing. When he thought that he knew enough, when he knew enough to write, when he knew everything he needed to know, he started writing the screenplay, and then wrote for another year and a half, and then made the film. So it took about probably 3 to 4 years before actually starting to produce the film. And in the movie, as I mentioned, Georg he's not an enemy of the state, he's not a subversive, he's not a dissident. But at the opening of his new play in December 1984, the Minister of Culture is in the audience, and 2 Stasi agents go along. Well, one is, I believe he's like the department head of the Stasi, and one of the just Stasi agents. One of the main characters, Gerd Wiesler, Hauptmann Gerd Wiesler. And they watch the play, and Wiesler is spying on the playwright, on Draiman, throughout the performance. So he spies him. He sees him down there, and he's got his his binoculars, and he's looking at him, and something about Draymond just doesn't look right. He's got that arrogant artist vibe to him, and he immediately gets suspicious. So he's talking with his boss, essentially, and Weasler says we should watch this guy because my spidey sense is tingling, and I think this guy might have some skeletons in the closet. The minister also seems to share these sentiments, and they launch an investigation, basically just to watch him to see what happens. So they bug his apartment, and for the majority of the movie, it is the operation of Weasler camped out in the attic of the apartment building. The entire apartment is bugged, and just listening in on his entire life and all his conversations, all his intimate interactions, being recorded and noted, well, not necessarily recorded, but noted in official reports, looking for something against Draymond. And they have a tough time of it. They can't find anything, but they keep it up because Draymond's girlfriend, Krista Maria, is also the love interest of the Minister of Culture, Minister Bruno Hempf. And Hempf is a real class act. We'll get into his character later. So the basic premise is that Hempf has initiated this investigation to basically remove Draymond from the picture so that he can get this actress to be his, and he uses all the perks of his position and his power and authority to do so. Eventually, one of Draymond's friends commits suicide, and that is kind of a shock for him. And a few events kind of conspire to how would you put it? Inspire him to take a stand on something. So he writes this, essentially a eulogy for his friend, where he talks about suicide in the GDR and how in 1977, I don't know how accurate this is, but in 1977, the GDR stopped recording suicides because I think the statistics were that only Hungary among the European nations had a higher suicide rate in 1976. So in 77, they stopped recording suicides because it's bad PR because everything has to be perfect. And he writes this piece and gets together with his friends and essentially has to write it in secret. He has to use a different typewriter, and he can't let his girlfriend know. He can't let Krista Maria know. And so he writes this piece to be smuggled into West Germany, West Berlin, and published there. Now, along the way, the agent who is in charge of leading the investigation against him, the surveillance effort, Weasler, first he starts out and he is he's presented as a typical, Stasi guy, kind of completely heartless. And the first scene is great. The first scene of the film is an interrogation with a young man being brought in. And I've got some of the dialogue here because this really, I thought this was great. And these are some of the first words of the film. So he sits down, they sit him in the chair, and Weasler asks him, what do you have to tell us? And the young man says, I've done nothing. I know nothing. Weasler, you've done nothing. Know nothing. You think we imprison people on a whim? And the guy says, Nein. No. And then Weasler comes back with, if you think our humanistic system capable of such a thing, that alone would justify your arrest. And the guy just goes, And then the interrogation proceeds for hours and hours, and it turns out this is there's an audio recording, and this is Weasler teaching the new recruits for the Stasi on proper interrogation techniques. And another great scene, just right in the beginning, one of the students says, well, because it jumps to like hours later when the guy hasn't slept for for hours, and he's just like he's falling asleep, and they're keeping him awake. And one of the students says, "Well, isn't it? Why do you keep him awake for so long? Isn't that inhuman?" And Weasler looks at him, comes forward, puts a little X next to his name on the chart of where the students are sitting, and then answers him, basically saying, "No, it's not inhuman, because when you keep someone awake, essentially how they react to being kept awake will be a sign of their guilt. If they start crying, an innocent person will rail against them for the injustice of being interrogated and having lies told about them. But a guilty person will crack, basically, and start crying. And in this case, the guy does crack and admits that he knows who helped someone escape into West Berlin. That's kind of the setup for Weasler's character. But through a number of events that happen through this interrogation, Weasler's listening to all this guy's conversations, how he interacts with his friends, how he celebrates his birthday party. And when Draymond's friend commits suicide, who was a director who had been blacklisted like 10 years ago, hadn't been able to work, he finally commits suicide, and for his birthday, he had gifted Draymond with the sheet music for a piano sonata called Sonata for a Good Man. This was actually composed for the film, so there's no composer listed on the music in the film. And so when he hears about the suicide of his friend, he plays the piece. And his girlfriend, Krista Maria, is in the room with him. And after he's finished, he says something like, he says two things. One, paraphrased, I can't understand how anyone who hears this, who truly hears this music, can be a bad person. And he says that he'd heard that, and this was a quote from, or a paraphrase of something that Gorky wrote about a conversation he had with Lenin. Lenin had told him that he couldn't listen to his favorite piece of music anymore. He couldn't listen to Beethoven's Appassionata, because when he did, he felt the impulse to just essentially hug and kiss people and pat their heads. And what the revolution really needed was to bust heads and to destroy people. And so this was actually the inspiration for making the movie. What's his name again? Von Hammerstruck? No. Von Donnersmarck. Von Donnersmarck had read this and thought, well, what if Lenin had heard, or what was it, Adam? What if Lenin had heard this music? What if we could play this music for Lenin? Right?
Yeah, what if he could play this music for Lenin to have him actually, feel the music and change and have a different course of history, essentially. Right.
So this is what happens with Weasler. Weasler hears this, and in that scene, he's got the single tear going down his cheek. And it's very moving. Within the confines of the film, I found it to be a realistic and moving development or transition for Weasler's character as he's exposed to actually listening to this Draymond guy, getting to know him, and then having this tragedy in Draymond's life, the music, hearing that quote, and like I said, a bunch of other things kind of conspire on Weasler to actually make him sympathetic to Draymond, the subject of his surveillance. And Weasler ends up basically writing fictional reports, which is another interesting thing. Draymond's a fiction writer. He writes plays, and Weasler ends up composing these fake reports to cover over for the treason that Draymond ends up committing, which is writing this eulogy about suicide. And so some tragic things happen. Before we talk about the end, were there any other events that you guys think I'm missing?
Well,
or should get to?
Just one crucial point is that Weasler, who's investigating Draymond, is also aware of the fact that the Minister of Culture, Bruno Hempf, who is conspiring against Draymond to put him out of the picture. And so this brutally efficient Stasi agent has, this is the opening for him to, it appeals to his sense of right and wrong on a whole new level. And this is in part why he has he knows that the deck is effectively stacked against Draymond, because there's this very powerful, committee member who is looking to find anything against Draymond. So you have that in the backdrop, that's kind of motivating in part what Wiesler is doing.
And also Grubitz, the head of the department, the Stasi department where they're all at. He's looking at this as a political game. He understands that Hempf is looking to get this other guy out of the way so he can have his woman. And Grubitz sees it as an opportunity from two angles. Number one, he can help Hempf gets what he wants, and thereby have a very powerful friend. But at the same time too, well, now he's got some blackmail, some dirt on him, so he can possibly use that for later. And so this is another thing that Wiesler is aware of, and one of the things that appeals to his inner humanity after he hears the Sonata for a Good Man. Because before, like you said, he was very, very tightly wound and, very, by the book. You see
Rigid.
his very rigid. Yes. His apartment is just, perfectly organized. Everything's in its perfect little spot, in its perfect place. And there's very little decor, and it's very minimalistic. And so he's very much a party man. And then, he hears the music and he starts to change a bit. And then, when all of this other stuff starts to develop and get more and more complicated, he runs up against, choices. So it starts with him writing these fake reports, and then he starts to get more involved. At one point, he even has, he sees Christa Maria coming home from being out and doing things with him. And so Wiesler rings the doorbell in order to get Draymond to go outside and see. So Draymond sees that Christa Maria is not where she said she was, and basically causes him to confront her about it. And then, there's other instances like that where he gets more involved. At one point, they have a fight because Draymond eventually does confront Christa Maria and says, "Don't go to him. You don't need him. You don't need him as a political backer to, get you work, essentially, because you're a good actress and you don't need him." And of course, because Wiesler is there listening the whole time, he feels it. And so she leaves and he leaves because his relief comes. So he's relieved of duty. So he goes out to watch, to see what happens. And then there's this drunk guy sitting outside. He's like, "Oh, what are you looking at?" And so Wiesler's like, "Okay, well, I can't sit here anymore." So he goes into the bar. And then Chris Maria comes in. And he has this kind of crisis moment where it's like, what does he do? Does he just leave? Does he say something to her? And then he gets up and he decides to go and talk to her. And, he gets involved by saying, you don't, he basically says, what she needs to hear in order to have the courage and confidence in order to stand up for herself and not go to Drempf, or not to Hempf, and basically hook up with him, Drumpf, in order to further her career. So that's another thing where he not only hears the music and then gets involved emotionally, he gets involved in a very real way by engaging with them without revealing who he is and what he's doing.
So the investigation proceeds, and Weisler's reports are basically saying, "Oh, there's nothing to see here." You know, he argues to scale down the investigation so they don't have to be on shifts. You know, he'll be the only one taking care of it because he can't trust the other guy, and so that's happening. But then the Stasi finds out from another source that Christa Maria is getting illegal medication through some doctor.
Well, that was from Hempf.
That was from Hempf, yeah.
Because right. Okay, so she gets the courage, right? She gets emboldened to leave and not go back to Hempf for anything. And so Hempf, they have him in one scene where he's sitting on the bed in a hotel room, and he's just like
stewing
and, you know, brooding. And then, yeah, you know, a short time later, he's like, he talks to Grubitz, the Stasi guy, and is like, she's getting illegal medication. This is where she's getting it. Pick her up.
Basically ruin her career. You know, I'm the jilted party here.
I don't want to see her on German streets again.
Yes. I am that powerful. You do this, or, you know, or else. And that's also a very kind of insightful dimension to this whole story. It's that people's lives were destroyed at the whims of not even political ideology, just pure, unadulterated power games. And it's very unlike the character Weisler, who is this brutally efficient technocrat who believes in the system. And he's not only growing this impoverished inner life by identifying with Dreiman and Christa Maria, who he's spying on, but he's also getting insight into how the real levers of power are being played out in observing the maneuvers of Hempf. So there is that dimension to it as well. And you know, there's one scene where Weisler is at his apartment soliciting the services of a prostitute who is well known among, you know, the Stasi residents of that apartment building. She's like, "Yeah, sure, I come here all the time. There are lots of you guys here." And it's a very cold, just mechanical interaction.
Just
business between the two. And it's such a stark contrast between the lovemaking that we see between the protagonists, Christa Maria and Dreiman. And
it's actually that I'm pretty sure that scene comes after the first time. So he's listening in on them, and he's listening in on them making love, you know, for the first time that he's there. Mm-hmm. So he writes in his report, you know, subjects appear to have intercourse or something, and so then that cuts to him that night. So it's like that prompted that in a sense that prompted him into that sexual encounter. Like he almost like a yearning. He wanted some of that feeling in his life that was totally lacking. You know, as this solitary loner, just working for the system. And that's how he tried to find it. And it was like a very like pathetic, like a pathetic attempt at establishing a human connection with someone. Mm-hmm. And like you could tell that he wanted more, and basically that's the only way that he thought that he could try to find it, and it was a total failure. Mm-hmm. Did you have anything else to say?
No, not on that particular part.
I thought I interrupted you.
Yeah, no.
So one of the things he eventually ends up, so Christa Maria, we left off, has been taken in, and she gives up Dreiman as the author of this report that was published in Der Spiegel. And so they send the Stasi to ransack the place and look for any evidence. They don't find anything because he's hiding the typewriter underneath some boards in between two of the rooms. They don't find it. Now, Grubitz, that's his name, right? Yeah, the boss. He's suspicious of Weisler at this point, and because here's Christa Maria saying that it was him the whole time, so what has Weisler been doing? How has he not noticed this? And so he gives Weisler one last chance, one last opportunity to redeem himself and make this right by interrogating Christa Maria. So he's sitting in the room, and she comes in. He's not facing her. He turns around, and that's when she sees him. She recognizes him. This was the guy that gave her those words in the bar that gave her that courage and confidence. And so there's this kind of strange connection between them. He gets it out of her that the typewriters underneath the boards. A great scene, by the way. And then he rushes off. And Grubitz asks for him, wants to talk to him. He's like, "Oh, he already left." And we find out he's been to Draymond's apartment. And Draymond gets there. Christa Maria gets there. A little confrontation, like, where have you been? And then the Stasi get there, and with Grubitz. And they're, well, we just wanted to check again, make sure we didn't miss anything. And then Grubitz, looks down. Oh, those floorboards don't look very kosher. And pries them open, and there's no typewriter. And at this point, as they're searching, as they find the floorboards, Christa Maria runs out because she knows what's underneath that floorboard. She runs out into the street deliberately, and this truck comes by and runs into her. It's basically suicide. And Weisler, who's watching on the street, he's like, things aren't going the way he thought they would go, or the way he would have wanted them to go, and he talks to her, and she basically says that it was just I wouldn't have been able to live with myself because I'm responsible for this. I turned him in. I ratted on him, and he's trying to tell her, no, I already took it. I'd taken care of it. Don't But she dies, and Draymond gets demoted to the Department M, opening.
Well, not
letters.
Draymond,
Weisler, yeah, sorry. He gets demoted to the mail department. And then that's pretty much the end of the drama. And it skips forward, the wall falls. And then, years after that, Draymond writes a book, a novel. I think the novel is called Sonata for a Good Man. And the archives have opened up, so Draymond looks through his file. Oh, but before that, yeah, there's a performance of another of his plays that he's at, and he has an encounter outside with Hempf.
It's the same play that they had started off at the beginning of the movie with, where Hempf was there and everybody else was there. So it's just coming back full circle to where he sees it again. He's reminded of Christa Maria, and then has to go outside. Because he just, it's too much for him.
So he sees Hempf outside, and they have a conversation, and he asks Hempf, well, why weren't you guys watching me? Why didn't you have surveillance on me? And Hempf kind of just like chortles, no, chortle isn't the right word. He laughs a bit and just says, we were watching you all the time. We knew everything about you. You were under full surveillance. And Draymond's like, that doesn't make any sense because I'm still here. and so he goes to the archives and gets his file, and that's where he's able to read through all these reports. And he's reading through, and then he sees these reports on how Draymond was writing this new play with his friends. He wasn't writing a new play, he was writing his thing on suicide. And there's even descriptions of the play that he's writing about Lenin and what Lenin's doing and the troubles. So Weisler was actually writing the outlines of this play on his own, which I thought was really funny. And so he finds out who's this guy, like HGW XX /7. Who is this guy? And he finds out who he is. Kind of like spies on him. Another interesting reversal. He's following him in a taxi and sees that he's basically delivering junk mail now, and hesitates and then doesn't confront him. But then writes this book. And then the last scene is Weisler delivering mail, and he's walking by the bookstore, and he sees the advertisement, the poster for Draymond's new book. So he walks in and he looks at a copy and he goes to the dedication, and it's to HGWXX/7. How does he put it? Just like
In gratitude.
in gratitude.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so the final scene is Weasler buying the book. And that's how the film ends. So before we kind of give our additional thoughts on the film itself and kind of our analysis of it, I wanted to bring up an article that came out soon after the movie was released, because there were some that actually refused to see it in East Germany because of the way they portrayed Weasler, because they essentially humanized one of the Stasi. One of the Stasi. And there's an article that I found from May 2007 by Anna Funder, an Australian writer who wrote this book, Stasiland, Stories from Behind the Berlin Wall. And I'll just want to read a couple things from this article, because she talks about this. She describes the film. Well, I'll just read a couple paragraphs. Despite the discomfort of friends of mine who suffered under the regime, some of whom are refusing to see Florian Henckel Von Donnersmarck's The Lives of Others, I think the film deserves its public and critical acclaim. It is a superb film, a thing of beauty, but its story is a fantasy narrative that could not have taken place and never did under the GDR dictatorship. As she writes, no Stasi man ever tried to save his victims because it was impossible. We'd know if one had because the files are so comprehensive. Unlike Weasler, who runs a nearly solo surveillance operation and can withhold the results from his superior, totalitarian systems rely on thoroughgoing internal surveillance, terror, and division of tasks. The film doesn't accurately portray the way totalitarian systems work because it needs to leave room for its hero to act humanely, something such systems are designed to prevent. Skipping a bit, she mentions how the first shot with the first scene in the film with the interrogation at the Hohenschönhausen prison wasn't actually filmed in that prison because it is now a museum, and it was at the time, and the director, Dr. Hubertus Knabe, he basically refused permission because of the storyline. And as he put it, when von Donnersmarck told him, about the story and that used Schindler's List as an example of the kind of film he wanted to make, Knabe's response was, "There was a Schindler, there was no Weasler."
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to comment on that for a second because, I think it's quite probably literally true to say that under that sort of a system, no Stasi agent could ever have had the freedom and agency to
or conscience
to help individuals in the manner that Weasler is portrayed as doing. By the same token, this is a film about the on another level. I think it's a film about the soul of the GDR, and so Weasler is, in a way, a stand-in and symbolic of a system at its core that could change and did change with the influence of Gorbachev and Perestroika and the will of the East Germans, who had, for months prior to the destruction of the Berlin Wall, had become emboldened to make efforts towards bridging their nation with the West and having freedom. So I kind of see Weasler as symbolic. Yeah. He's had a taste of freedom. He's begun to assimilate what it means to be a human being, and where a lot of that was beaten out of the lives of the East Germans under communist rule, and so he's kind of a stand-in, and you can understand the for those who have suffered, especially who understood it, you can understand their resistance to having such a character portrayed in the way that his is. But I think it's kind of missing the point a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I would just say that, this film also reminded me quite a bit of our discussion with Rod Dreher and the coming soft totalitarianism and his look at, lives in Eastern Europe that were, in the influence of the Soviets and communism for so many years. Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, among others. And I thought the film did a pretty good job of conveying the emotional environment, the way that individuals who were the dissidents at the time, the intellectuals, the literati, had to communicate with one another, and had to hold themselves back and hold each other back from making statements that can get themselves into very deep trouble. And yet, so I thought that tension and that struggle was very well shown for what it is. And for those of you who haven't yet watched that show or read Rod Dreher's book, highly recommended as a kind of adjunct to this movie in particular. And other movies I think we'll get into that depict what totalitarianism looks and feels and sounds like, and is made more real for being put into a fictional narrative. Mm-hmm. So I think the filmmaker did a wonderful job with this movie. I mean, I like yourself, Harrison. I had seen this movie a number of years ago as well, and remember liking it very much. But I feel like it's even better now that I understand more of what it's about. And the whole movie is framed in this question as to whether or not individuals can change. And the Minister of Culture, Hemp, says no, they don't change. They can't change. And for him,
projection.
It's true. It's a projection, exactly. But for Dreyman, the playwright, it is absolutely true, and he makes it true. He helps it to become true for the very Stasi agent who's investigating him, Wiesler, and for the entire country. So there was that very interesting perspective as well, and I can't recommend it enough. I don't think I have anything. I can be very critical of movies, for certain things, and I didn't find anything. From scene to scene to scene, everything was so. And we watched this with a few folks last night again, and one of our friends turned to us, and she was like, "The pacing of this movie was just perfect," and it is. It's like it's a little bit like reading a novel in how well drawn out it is. I mean, you get the inner life of the characters, you get some complex dynamics going on, but everything is well articulated. Everything is very clear. You get the perspective of every character, and none of them feel like stand-ins for real people. They all seem like real people. They all sound like real people. So this is one to put on your list, folks. That's what I say.
Yeah. I don't know if it's Anna Funder's words or if she was kind of referencing someone else, but she essentially said that it's kind of considered the first film that accurately portrays what the GDR was actually like. Because there were other movies, of course, but the GDR and even a kind of a semi-critical take on it had never really been done seriously. There were a couple comedies that came out, like Goodbye Lenin, I think that's the name of it, which I thought was great. I liked that movie, but it's not the same, right? This is a more realistic take on it that doesn't kind of Goodbye Lenin is a comedy and it's a feel-good movie. Well, I'd recommend checking that one out too if you want. We're not going to talk about it though. But Von Donnersmarck's response to that kind of the criticism, this is what he said. He said, "I didn't want to tell a story as much as explore how someone might have behaved. The film is more of a basic expression of belief in humanity than an account of what actually happened." So it is total fiction, and so, Weasler isn't a real person. There was no Weasler, but like you said, Weasler is, he fulfills a purpose, in the film that maybe didn't actually exist, but it's for art. But I found the role that he played very interesting. I want to give a kind of like a ponerological analysis of the movie, because there's some interesting things going on there. I think that just intuitively, the writer-director managed to capture a whole lot, probably just because he knew from his research what things were like, and so he managed to capture bits of what the GDR was actually like. And but the elements that he managed to capture, I think, are some of the most important ones, like the character of Hempf. Hempf is a total psychopath, and he's a good psychopath, not in the sense that he's virtuous or anything, but
we know what you mean, Harris.
he's a good psychopath. He's not overdone, like he's not over the top. He's just a scummy, politician. That's pretty much all he is, and but very well done, very realistically portrayed. Even that last scene with Draymond was great, because he's totally in character, and he's not powerful anymore, but he's still totally arrogant, and nothing can rattle him, nothing can get through to him, just because that's his personality structure. And then you have the guys working in the Stasi who are just kind of part of the system, in it for themselves, don't really care about what they do to the lives of these people that they're going after. And then Weasler himself is an interesting character. Like I mentioned, he's a loner. He's dogmatic. He's rigid, black and white thinking. I don't think this was intentional, but you could describe him as like having schizoid personality disorder. I'll read one paragraph from Ponerology, where Lobachevsky is describing schizoids as, he said, "Schizoid characters aim to impose their conceptual world upon other people or social groups, using a relatively controlled pathological egotism and the exceptional tenacity derived from their persistent nature." I think that's a perfect description of Weasler. Thus, they are thus eventually able to overpower another individual's personality, which causes the latter's behavior to turn desperately illogical. He's a prison interrogator. That's essentially exactly what he does. That's his job. They may also exert a similar influence upon the group of people they have joined. They are psychological loners who begin to feel better in some human organization, wherein they become zealots for some ideology, religious bigots, materialists, etc. In another part, he mentions that schizoids are torn between two worlds, because they see the potential for a totalitarian system, and they're the original supporters of such a system, like Karl Marx and a lot of the early communists. But they're not psychopaths. They might have muted emotional nature, but they still have a pull towards what Lobachevsky calls the world of normal men. And so they're in the middle. They're between two worlds. The unrealistic thing, at least according to like what Lobachevsky might say, is that in a system like the GDR at this point in time, the schizoids, probably would have already have been filtered out of the system, probably back in the 50s or the late 40s. And that jives with what the criticism of the film on its historical realism, that by that time there were no men like Wiesler in the Stasi. Lobachevsky says that secret police agents were often psychopaths. So chances are most of them were psychopaths. They weren't necessarily schizoids. You wouldn't find a guy like Wiesler in the system. But it's interesting that he chose a character like, I think that was just his artistic choice and his knowledge of just human nature, that he chose a character like Wiesler as this stand-in, someone who does fit within the system, does fit within this human organization, and finds this camaraderie, kind of this sense of purpose within this organization, within the Stasi. He's rigid, he's ideological, he's serious. Like even Grubitz will joke and bend the rules, and like he's not. He is more opportunistic and psychopathic in the sense that he's willing to just make use of the system for his own goals, and he just doesn't really care about the ideology. It doesn't matter if he, like, how does he put it at one point where Wiesler says, well, why are we going after this guy? Or it was something about Hempf, and I can't remember. Why were they watching him? Or why are we doing this for Hempf or something? And Grubitz basically says, well, it doesn't really matter, if there's something in it for us, then, why not?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. I can't remember the exact scenario. But so that's the function that schizoid individuals in a pathocracy have in real life. And in the movie, that's portrayed as he is the bridge between these two worlds, and he's hesitant. He's more on one side, and then slowly gets pulled towards the other side. So it's a perfect character choice to play that role within the film. Someone who can go either way and has been on one side, but has the potential to move to the other. And it's not like Wiesler's presented as some great guy, ideal guy that's just hampered by the system, and he really has these high ideals or anything. No, he's a hardcore Stasi guy, and even after his conversion, so to speak, he's still working for the Stasi, and he's still reading people's mail and writing reports to get them sent to prison for saying a bad word about the local minister of culture or whomever. Like, so he's still a pretty rotten guy, but he had there is that connection, that that redeeming quality that he has, and that he grows within the film. So they've managed to, in the film, they've managed to capture some kind of some of the main characters in a pathocracy and to embody them in individual characters. So you have like Hempf, and Hempf represents an entire type of person that was, the people at the top in the communist system. Totally psychopathic. Then you have all the guys like within the Stasi, some just like him, but like opportunists, not narcissists. And then you have the normal people like Draymond. And then the experience of living within that system, where you have all these people who have a normal emotional life, but who can't express it because there are all these written and unwritten rules for what you can say, what you can say and do, and what you can't say and can't do. And it is a mental prison. And a couple of things stuck out to me. One was a description. This was an interesting scene. I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, or if you guys had a different interpretation. At one point, Wiesler goes into Grubitz's office with a piece of paper, and I'm pretty sure on that piece of paper was the incriminating evidence that he was going to turn Draymond in. Mm-hmm. Before he gets the chance to hand over this piece of paper, Grubitz is like, oh, check out this, new report written by, one of my students, their dissertation. I gave them a B, even though it's great, but I don't like to, puff up my students too much. They have to work hard for it. And it's this report on on how to, what was it? The imprisonment of the artistic personality or something like that, where this Stasi student describes the different artistic types, and Grubitz informs Wiesler that Drayman is type number 4, and the best type of imprisonment for a man of such a type is that, you don't, because they have such a high opinion of themselves, you don't give them any publicity or any human interaction. You basically put them in solitary confinement. You don't tell them that they're charged with anything or when they're going to get out. You just put them there and you leave them there, and you don't have any interaction with them. And the lack of human contact, which they so crave and need, will just be the psychological torture. And then because you don't actually actively harm them in any way, you just don't do anything to them. Then when they get out, they can't write any bad things about them, about what happened, because what they didn't torture you, what they just left you in the room all the time. And then the great thing about this is that whenever we use this technique on artists, they don't write anything once we release them. So you just put them in for 10 months and then release them, and problem solved. And Wiesler's just kind of like listening to this, being like, oh, geez. And finally putting a human face to these artists who are imprisoned in such a way, and just rolls up the paper and walks out. And that's so there's that scene. And what was the other one? The joke. So now this scene was great for several reasons. Grubitz and Wiesler go into the canteen to have their lunch, and they're heading over, and Wiesler just starts to sit down in the middle. And Grubitz says, the bosses sit at that table over there. And then Wiesler says, well, socialism has to start somewhere. In other words, it's like, why are the bosses sitting over there? We're supposed to be this socialist country. It demonstrates his own dogmatism and his own naive idealism in this kind of system. Mm-hmm. And so they sit down in the middle, and then this young guy comes down to sit with his friends who are just at the same table over a bit, and says, I just heard a new one. And he sits down and he says, and he starts telling a communist joke, which were verboten. And then his friends are looking at him, and he's like, what? He looks over, and Grubitz, his boss, is just staring at him. And he's like, oh, no, what were you saying? No, keep saying it. He's like, oh, no, sorry, I was just blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's fine. I want to hear the joke. I've probably heard it before. I know a ton of them. So the guy finishes the joke, which is quite funny. And then Grubitz just says, name. He gives his name, department. And the kid is just like, a young kid. He's just like mortified. And then Grubitz breaks out laughing, essentially, haha, gotcha. And then he tells his own communist joke. And that scene just captures so much of the absurdity of the GDR and of communism in general. So it was the same all over Eastern Europe and the USSR. You could go to prison for saying certain jokes, but the total absurdity of it in that if Grubitz had chosen, that guy could have become a prisoner. Could have gone to jail. They could have done whatever they wanted to him. But he chose to laugh at the joke because secretly everyone knows the jokes, right? It's simply used as a method of social control. And meanwhile, what Wiesler is watching this and like, what's Wiesler thinking? Because he probably would have thought, well, no, that guy should be punished for that. You can't say anything bad about it. It was a joke about the leader of the GDR. And then here's Grubitz, who tells another joke about the same guy, the leader. And it's like, on the one hand, there's this need for rigid conformity and not saying anything bad about the leadership whatsoever. On the other hand, just a total lack of respect that's underlying that fake respect. It's essentially a culture of lies, where you're forced to conform to this culture of lies when no one actually believes it. Not even the people who are enforcing the fiction. no one actually believes any of the lies, except maybe Weasler, or guys like Weasler. So, well, I could keep going on and on, but did you guys have anything to say?
I wanted to circle back a bit to the view of the film as one of the story of humanity and hope, and the hope that people can change and that things can change. And you'd already alluded to, Alon, the one of the scenes that I was thinking about, which was very early on, where Draymond and Hempf are talking, and Hempf tells him, oh, you think people can change, people can't change. And Draymond's disagrees with him, and he's like, people can change, and we have to hold on to hope, essentially. And so taking that along with what Von Donnersmarck said about why he wrote the film. He wrote it as a story of hope, story of the hope for change in humanity, which is very much what Draymond, that was his position. He wasn't a propagandist. He genuinely tried to work within the system to help bring hope to people. And so I see that as being interesting, where the writer and director of the film and the movie was very much where Draymond was kind of like him and what he hopes to do with his art, which is exactly what Draymond was trying to do with his art, which was to call for people to believe in themselves enough to change and to stand up for either themselves or what is true or what is right and what is good. And I thought that was really interesting. And with Wiesler as a how did I put it earlier? He was, in one sense you could see him as a stand-in for the GDR, but I saw him more as the stand-in for Lenin and for humanity in general, and that but it's the same way that Draymond's hope was for change. It's the same with Von Donnersmarck's hope for change, in that they hope that by putting this stuff out there that we can grow as people, that we can avoid all of these unnecessary sufferings that come from believing these lies and supporting these lies and doing these horrible things to each other. They have to believe and hope that there is and can be something more, because if there's nothing more, then what's the point?
Well, so just thinking on it a little bit, it seems to me that we have a pretty good analogy between the political pressure and need to acquiesce to the powers that be in the GDR. Is in some, at least some minor way, comparable to Hollywood at the moment, in the sense that I do think that the wokeism that we're seeing right now does have some amount of pressure that's being put upon the individuals in the West, in the U.S. in particular, and maybe some of these people feel compelled to chime in and sound woke, and the Stasi is the cancel culture, woke social media, monsters that are vilifying and attacking and demonizing people who dare to say anything that's questioning wokeism. Witness what happened with Gina Carano a couple of months ago in her statements. So there is this, really, why are we talking about this movie? Why do we continue to discuss left-wing authoritarianism and totalitarianism? It's because we're seeing this phenomena right before our eyes, some version of it that's infiltrated Western society and culture and is spreading like wildfire to some great extent. And God forbid you should be a strong voice and a recognized voice and speak out against it, especially if you're in politics. Forget about it. They will find a way. They will, there'll be a rumor, and there will witness this with Matt Getz in Florida and this recent story. Suddenly there's this rumor of something, and then you have two major newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post that repeat the rumor, and then it becomes fact, and then it becomes calls for his resignation as a politician, as a representative, and he has to really fight to get his version of the story, which is that there are complete lies being propagated against the man. He has to really fight in order to resist this perception, this lie that's being created about him. And why are they doing it? Because he dares speak out in favor of some views in politics, and which is against the orthodoxy, against this vehement, relentless, aggressive drive under the band of radical left-wing ideology in some cases.
Well, just on that, I don't know the truth or falsehood of it, but I think that probably the vast majority of Republicans and Democrats have bigger skeletons in their closets. So I wouldn't be surprised one way or the other to see that either Republican or Democrat heroes have, that any such statements could be true about any of them. So I'll wait one way or the other. But because it's all one thing. When it comes down to it, Republicans. Well, that's a whole other show. But
I would say in this
ruling establishment.
I would say in this particular instance, it seems to me anyway pretty clear what's going on. Not that you don't have a fair amount of conservatives who are hypocrites and who have some major skeletons in their closet. I'm not saying that at all. And he may not even be representative of most of them. But in this one instance, the kind of line of force involved is so clear. Anyway, I don't know how good an analogy it is, but it comes to mind. So I present it here for review. To relate that back to the film, there was what I think Adam had mentioned about Grubitz collecting all this information. It can be used either to make a friend or as compromise, essentially. Mm-hmm. So what you see in politics is that oftentimes when there's a scandal, when there's something to the scandal, pretty much all the politicians are involved in similar scandals, and it's just that this is the one that we can now use to sacrifice this one who went against the grain in some way. It's like one of our own who has fallen off the wagon of following the plan, and then it's like, okay, we're going to kick you to the curb now, because we're going to. That's probably what was going on with Epstein. Epstein had dirt on everyone, and it's part of a club that you join, and then that can be then be held over your head and used to make you conform to a certain line. And if you step out of line, then they've got the material to ruin your career and send you off to the country. But to close off, I'll share a few communist jokes. We did a whole show on communist jokes, didn't we? Yes.
Yeah, so here are a few other ones. This one is in reference to Poland because Poland in like the late 40s and early 50s was providing a whole bunch of like stuff to the USSR, essentially like coal. So here's a joke. Negotiations are going on between Mao and Stalin. The Chinese leader asks the Soviet leader for help. We need $1 billion, 50 million tons of coal, and a lot of rice. Stalin turns to his advisors. Dollars, okay. Coal, okay. But where will Beirut, the leader of, the communist leader of Poland, get the rice? Another one. What is the difference between painters of the naturalist, impressionist, and the socialist realist schools? So socialist realism, I think you could probably say that Dreyman was in the film at least, was a type of socialist realist, presenting the life of the workers and trying to work within that. So the answer to the question, the naturalist paints as they see. The impressionists paint as they feel. The socialist realists as they are told. And then a final anecdote. There was in the GDR in 1961, there was a cabaret troupe, and they performed a version of Where's the Dog Buried? And this is the description of the scene. Two of the actors start dismantling a wall, brick by brick. What are you doing? Asks a third. We're tearing down the walls of the brick factory. The brick factory. They reply. Why exactly are you doing that? There's a shortage of bricks, the other responds. Exactly, say the two laborers, continuing with their work. That's why we're dismantling the walls. They needed bricks, so they're tearing down the brick factory. And another scene has a character, or there's a character in there who who answers every question with a quotation from Walter Ulbricht, the leader of the GDR, just to be absolutely on the safe side. Mm-hmm. And the members of this troupe were imprisoned for 9 months, and many of them in solitary confinement. So just an idea of, I guess, the joke's on them. But that said, check out The Lives of Others. Great film, and yeah, we'll be talking about other films that we like in the future too. So take care and enjoy.